So we're at Edinburgh University. This is my alma mater, so I studied here. I actually got 3 qualifications from Edinburgh University. I did my undergraduate here. So I studied molecular biology here, so a 4-year course here at Edinburgh University. I then came back about 15 years afterwards to do my MBA here, and both Mike and I did our Blue Badge qualification course here at Edinburgh University. So we do follow in that footsteps of lifelong learning. I'm going to take you back into the medical quad here. Now this place here, this square here, is really popular with the kids. They love to do all their skateboarding here. This is where they all hang out. So we'll just take a round a little bit here. The schools are on break at the moment. The high schools are in their half-term holidays, so a lot of the kids are out not doing much social distancing, I have to add, but they're kids. They've got the music playing. They've got nowhere to go, so this is quite a nice place for them to hang out. But we'll just give them a little bit of a wide berth. Now, Mike mentioned the Mcewan Hall. I go hot and cold to the Mcewan Hall. I still have recurring nightmares because I actually did my exams in this hall as well. So I do have this recurring nightmare of going into this hall, sitting down and looking at the ceiling, because the ceilings are beautifully painted with lots of Greek statues all around it as well. So my nightmare is actually spending my time looking at the ceiling and not actually looking at the exam paper, because I did do my exams in here. It's a lovely hall inside, and they have music in here, and also the graduation hall. Now, Edinburgh University is the 4th oldest university in Scotland. So the oldest is St Andrews, that was founded in the early 1400s. Second oldest is Glasgow, which is the middle of the 1400s, 1451. And then the third is Aberdeen, which was in the late 1400s. So Edinburgh is a bit of a Johnny-come-lately. It wasn't established until the late 1500s. In fact, it's known as the first secular university. Now, when we say secular, we don't mean it's non-religious, because it really was religious. It was just that Edinburgh was established after the Reformation, the religious Reformation, where we went from being a Catholic country to being a Protestant country. Before the Reformation, you had to have authority from the Pope to establish a university. So the first 3, that's St Andrews, Glasgow and Aberdeen, were established with a papal bull. Edinburgh was established by the town council, so we didn't need to go to the Pope for the authority to establish itself as a university. At the moment, there's about over 22,000 students, undergraduates here at this university, and there's about 11,000 postgraduates. But it's also open in the evening to the local people here to go for lifelong learning. I myself have studied French here in the evening. I do like to go to my French classes. But I'm taking you back into the medical school itself, and I want to introduce you to some of the famous people who are affiliated to the university, and also some of the great discoveries that have been made here in these hallowed halls. Now, one of the people I want to introduce, and the Americans will probably know this a lot, the Americans refer to the British as being limeys. Why do they refer to us as being limeys? Well, because on the sailing ships, a lot of the sailors suffered from scurvy because they lacked vitamin C. And the guy who discovered this was Mr. James Lind back in the 1700s. And James Lind here wrote his treatise on medicine for the Navy, and he was the author of a treatise on scurvy. And it was about needing lemons and limes, and hence the Americans refer to the British as limeys, because they started to take limes on board of them, all due to Mr. James Lind here. During the Second World War, Edinburgh University was very famous as well, because here a lot of Polish refugees came over here, and the Polish army also came over here when Poland capitulated. Scotland played host to a big Scottish population, and it was Edinburgh University that maintained education for the Poles and made sure that after liberation, that the Poles had an established medical schools as well. So they actually trained the Polish army here. And it's a plaque up here, it's gifted to the Edinburgh University from the people of Poland to say thank you for training the doctors so they were ready and trained when Poland was liberated. One person I want to introduce, we know of Lord Lister, that's Joseph Lister. You all know Listerine for doing your teeth in the morning. Well, he actually was founder of antiseptic and antiseptic surgery. Before that, it was really hit or miss if you went in for surgery. more people died than actually survived the surgery. But then along comes Joseph Lister in the late 1800s, discovered antiseptic, and more people started to survive. Above him, we've also mentioned James Simpson. James Simpson discovered chloroform here at this building in Edinburgh here. It's quite funny actually, James Simpson, because when he discovered it, it was kind of the guy who discovered laughing gas. They tried it on themselves. James Simpson used to invite people to his house, and they would treat his wife. So they'd knock her out with chloroform, and they would stick pins in her. Plus ça change, eh? But one of the group I want to introduce you to here is the 4 students who went over to Montreal and established McGill University Medical School here. And so again, this is a gift from McGill University. I love Montreal, I love Canada. So if anybody from Montreal, bonjour Montréal, j'adore Montréal. And I've been to the university at McGill as well, lovely university in the city of Montreal. Now I mentioned before some famous Scots, and there's a couple of Scots who actually signed the American Declaration of Independence. One being Dr. John Witherspoon, and he was a theologian here from Edinburgh, and he was a graduate of Edinburgh University, taught here at Edinburgh University, and he actually established Princeton as the Presbyterian University in New Jersey. And I had the good fortune of about 2-3 years ago, I was over in New York. I go over every year in April. There's a big parade in New York City. It's funded by the American Scottish Foundation, and I'm a member of there, and I love going over there. And while I was in New York, I went down to Princeton to look at there, and I've got my photograph taken. If you go onto my website, you'll see me and my photograph taken at the statue of Mr. Witherspoon, who was a signatory to the American Declaration of Independence. We've also talked about famous authors, and we all know about Sherlock Holmes. Well, this is where Sir Arthur Conan Doyle studied here. And he actually modelled Sherlock Holmes on 2 of the doctors. Sherlock Holmes and Watson are modelled upon 2 of the doctors that he worked with here in Edinburgh. He gave up his studies, as I mentioned before. We've already talked about Arthur Conan Doyle, but this is where he graduated. Now I want to mention this woman here, Sophia Louisa Jex Blake. She is a pioneering woman. There were 7 women who enrolled here at Edinburgh University Medical School. Women were not allowed to matriculate at Edinburgh University until Sophia Louisa Jex Blake and her 6 compatriots enrolled here. They did a matriculation exam. 4 of the group were in the top 7 for the matriculation. Matriculation was the entrance exam you had to do to get into university. So they were allowed to enter. They became the first women to enter a British university, but they had a really, really hard time. They had to pay more than the male students. The male students gave them a really hard time, but they fought on, and these 7 women went on. However, the university court refused them to graduate. So although they matriculated and they studied here at Edinburgh University, they did not graduate. They could not become doctors. So they left and they went to London. The group went to London and they established their own education establishment down in London, and it's where women got their degrees. Sophie then came back up here to Edinburgh and established another hospital, a teaching hospital at another part of the city where women only were enrolled. And so great pioneer women. So I'm going to just champion a bit more of the women in a few of our hidden corner series. But before we leave the university, we move around a bit. I want to also mention a couple of other people here who are quite famous. If you're a nurse or a doctor, you've probably heard of Hodgkin's lymphoma, you'll have heard of Addison's disease, and you might also have heard of Bright's disease. They're all different diseases, and these are the men who studied here at Edinburgh University and made the great discoveries that made leaps and bounds in terms of the medical knowledge here in Edinburgh. So lots of famous people. There are 19 Nobel laureates from Edinburgh University, and I will show you some of the buildings that are named after some of the laureates as well. The Chancellor of the university used to be the Duke of Edinburgh. In fact, when I graduated, my first graduation, it was the Duke of Edinburgh who gave me my degree. When you graduate here from Edinburgh University, it's called being donned, and you saw on the Mcewan Hall building there, you saw somebody who was wearing a hat. The hat is actually made out of the trousers of John Knox. So John Knox was a great reformer, and they've taken his trousers and they made a hat, so you get actually donned by the trousers of John Knox. Now, if you're not Presbyterian, or if you're not religious, and you don't want to have John Knox's trousers on you, or if you're Catholic, for example, and you don't want John Knox's trousers on your head, then students will put their hand on their head so the trousers don't touch you. It's a little tradition here you have in Edinburgh if you don't want to be donned by the trousers of John Knox. Now, I mentioned that this is my alma mater. There are 4 universities here in Edinburgh. So there's Edinburgh University, which is the oldest here in Edinburgh. We also have Heriot-Watt University, which is more of a technical university, I guess. And we also have Napier University, named after James Napier, who discovered logarithms. And the other one that we have here is Queen Margaret University, referred to as QM. But Edinburgh University is non-campus. We have, well, in terms of campus, it's not in a park like the other universities are. This is the city centre, this is the main part of it. But the science faculty, where I studied my science, is about 2 miles further south. And again, lovely, wonderful reputation for the sciences here in Edinburgh University, because this is also, if you recollect, some of you may know Dolly the Sheep, or heard of Dolly the Sheep. Well, Dolly the Sheep was the first mammal to be cloned, and it was here in Edinburgh, at Edinburgh University, and the Bioscience Quarter, where Dolly was cloned. And I'm going to let you into a little national secret. Why is Dolly called Dolly? We've got the kids here playing there. Just wait for the kids there. You're live on TV, girls.
What channel?
Facebook. So the kids love giving you a little wave there. Well, Dolly was cloned from the mammary gland of another sheep. So who do you know called Dolly that's also famous for her mammary glands? Miss Parton, Dolly Parton. So Dolly the Sheep is named after Dolly Parton. Now, it was said, and I cannot really claim this is true or not, but we all love stories. And one of the stories is that when Dolly the Sheep was 1 year old, Dolly Parton sent her a birthday card to Dolly from Dolly. And apparently it was on display at the National Museum, because Dolly is actually, the original Dolly is stuffed and mounted. That's Dolly the Sheep, not Dolly Parton. Dolly the Sheep is stuffed and mounted in the National Museum of Scotland. So when you come to Edinburgh next time, you can go into the museum and you can see the original Dolly. So we're going to walk into the square. You can see some modern buildings here. This building of informatics that we're looking at here, and this is named after Dugald Stewart. When we were up on Carlton Hill, you may remember there was a monument dedicated to Dugald Stewart. He was a mathematician and philosopher, polymath. And this is one of the newest buildings of the university here. The university is huge here in Edinburgh. We're going to take you into George Square. This was always now known as the centre of Edinburgh University. And traditionally it's where the faculties of the humanities were, so English, economics, etc. But over the years since I've been here, certainly buildings have come, buildings have gone. The tallest buildings in Edinburgh are actually the university buildings. And I'm going to take you around to one of the largest towers. Mike is just giving you another view of TV at Row, or TV at House, the Student Union. Spent many time in there. It has the best haggis in Edinburgh. If you're interested, you get lovely haggis in there. And it's very reasonably priced. It's the university. It's a first purpose-built student union, owned by the students, not by the university, paid for by the students. And to this day it is. And because we are alumni, Mike and I, of this university, we can go in there at any time to get our lovely haggis. And I'm sure you'll all love the haggis when you come to Scotland as well. Now, just coming into view now, there's a large white tower block here. This is the Appleton Tower, named after Edward Victor Appleton. He was a Nobel Prize winner. It was through his work and endeavours during the Second World War that Britain got the radar, so it was able to defend itself from the bombing. So during the Battle of Britain, it was his invention. his work in radio physics that developed the radar. He was also the principal of Edinburgh University for quite a number of years, and so they dedicated this building to Edward Appleton. And I started my whole university career on the 6th floor of the Appleton Tower. That's where I did my biology labs in there, where we did our dissections. It was lovely. We dissected a dogfish, and you had the same dogfish for about 8 weeks, and it stank to high heaven. I still can conjure up the smell of that dogfish in my nose to this day. Now, the square itself is a lovely square. You can see the autumn colours, and it's open to the public. And in the warmer days, during summertime, you see all the students lounging around here. But during the Edinburgh Festival, the park is opened up for the festival. They put up a big tent. They have a Spiegel tent here. Spiegel being German for mirror, so it's a mirror tent. And they have live shows here. So this whole square is taken over for the Edinburgh International Festival, because the university is in recess when the festival is on. And the university makes a lot of money by leasing out its theatres and leasing out its land to the festival goers here. Now, the building you're looking at here, again, the older building, this is part of the medical school. The medical school has now moved to south of the city, and this was actually where the pharmacology department of drugs was here. So let's go in here. And there's a little statue to Robert Louis Stevenson, who we've mentioned before, because Robert Louis Stevenson was also an alumnus of the university. And you can see there's a plaque up here to Robert Louis Stevenson. Stevenson studied architecture and physics, and he was destined to join his father and his grandfather, because his father and grandfather are famous for building the lighthouses all around Great Britain. But Robert Louis Stevenson hated that idea. And in fact, he gave up. He did work for his father for a short time, hated it so much, he gave up to become a writer, to pursue his passion of being a writer. I don't know if Mike can pick up the colours of the autumn colours here. But lovely colours. Now, another graduate of Edinburgh University is a chap who you may have heard of. You may be familiar with his name. His name is J.M. Barrie. Now, J.M. Barrie is famous because he was made famous because he wrote the book of Peter Pan. And as it happens, just at the weekend there, I was up north in the little town of Kirriemuir, and I was actually staying in Mike's, got a lovely holiday cottage up there in the north, and I was very grateful to be able to rent it from Mike for the weekend. And I did a little tour in Kirriemuir. Kirriemuir is just hidden in the hills in the county of Angus, and I visited J.M. Barrie's birthplace and also his grave. So the whole town is kind of dedicated to J.M. Barrie. We'll talk a little bit more about J.M. Barrie in one of our hidden corners as well, because I think it's worth mentioning. Barrie himself was born into quite a large family. He was the second youngest of 10 children. Now, you think that's a big family? Well, I am actually one of 12. I have 11 brothers and sisters. So J.M. Barrie had quite a small family compared to me. This is why I like to pick out women, because I think the women that we're going to talk about in a bit more detail. Another one is a woman called Elsie Ingalls. Elsie Ingalls, the quadrangle that we were in the medical school is actually named after Elsie Ingalls, and she studied with Sophia. Mentioned Sophia. She actually studied with Sophia, but Sophia was actually quite a tough teacher, and she had strict rules. And Elsie was a bit more liberal in the way she approached things. So she left this university and said, when she graduated, she herself set up another teaching school with her father, teaching medicine. But she went to nurse, to be a doctor with the British Army, and ended up in the wars in Serbia. And she's highly regarded in Serbia as well. She was also a major suffragette as well, and she pioneered not only women's education, but women's rights and the women's right to vote. And unfortunately, she died before women got the vote. But she was famous here in Scotland, a pioneering woman. And they named a hospital after her here. And it was a maternity hospital. It was named after Elsie Ingalls. And we're going to talk a bit more about Elsie Ingalls as well. I love talking about pioneer women. I grew up with 6 sisters. I cannot get away from not talking about pioneer women because my sister would give me hell if I didn't mention it. Also, my mother was my mother was highly educated, but she was taken out of school because in those days, this is in the 1930s, they didn't see any benefit in educating women. So my mother was actually what we call the Dux medalist, so the brightest girl in this whole school. It's a mixed school. But her mother decided to pull her out so that her brothers could be educated instead. Big mistake. We have an expression here, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. My uncle was thick, as my mother would say. He wasn't a very bright boy. But my mother went back to school herself. She brought up 12 children. She went back, got an education in the same high school that I was at, so she actually went back to high school. Then she went to college and became a teacher. So again, it's this pioneering Scottish women that I like to talk about. So I couldn't get away without talking about women in depth. So there's a little bit of personal history here as well. Now I want to show you the buildings here on the right. So these are the original buildings from the end of the 1700s here. So we were in the new town of Edinburgh. We saw the grand big buildings here. Well, this is a later square, but still part of the new town architecture mentality. And these are the original buildings that still stand here in the square. The Mike talked about the musicians that played in Sandy Bells. There was a few famous musicians here who actually contributed to the establishment of the Scottish Studies, because Scottish Studies, although we live in Scotland, the Scottish Studies wasn't really established at Edinburgh University until the 1900s. We're always educated in English, and Scottish Studies actually became, well, you would speak Scots at home, but you would never speak Scots at school. So you kind of had Scottish accents and dialect really knocked out of us. We were not allowed to speak. We were all told to speak proper English rather than Scots. But in the playground, you'd be speaking Scots. You'd go home, you'd be speaking Scots. Well, Edinburgh University established a School of Celtic and Scottish Studies. And it's down here, we'll walk down the street here. But there's lots of famous people here who actually lived. Walter Scott actually stayed in one of these houses here. We'll notice, we've talked about him before, but he was here in George Square. And we have famous plaques put up here. Again, we're going up to here, talk about pioneering women again. There's a woman up here. Her name is Jane Welsh Carlyle. Now Carlyle was the male, her husband, Thomas Carlyle, was a famous essayist, writer, polemicist. He was a critique. He had an opinion on everything. He was a high conservative, ultra conservative. He was also pro-slavery. Not a very nice chap all round. But his wife here, they lived in this house here. This Carlyle actually became one of the principals of Edinburgh University, believe it or not. But she became famous in her own right for her letter writing, and she influenced a lot of the early 1900s writers. Let's move a little bit down here. She said that she influenced the writers of the Bloomsbury set, for example, Virginia Woolf, etc. When their letters were written. Her and her husband had a very, very tumultuous relationship. It is said that they were meant for each other because they were so horrible to each other. And it said they're so lucky they met each other, so only 2 people were miserable. Because if they married other people, there'd be 4 miserable people. So they all say that the Carlyles are meant for each other. And mentioned Arthur Conan Doyle. You saw that he was his plaque at the medical school. He was born, we've mentioned him before, but he lived in this house here as well. So again, you're walking in the footsteps of great people here. So he lived from here from 1876 to 1880. So next door to the Carlisle, so famous people will all be living here. Walter Scott also lived here about 100 years before. And we'll come up to his house quite shortly. I love the houses here. I think the architecture is so lovely. It's, you know, they were built to last. And here we have the St. Albert's Catholic Chaplaincy. I was brought up Catholic. My grandmother was a staunch Catholic, and so when I came up to Edinburgh University, unbeknownst to me, my grandmother got in touch with the priest here and gave her my address. So I used to have this Catholic Students' Union knocking on my door because of my grandmother, who was Irish Catholic. And it's still the Catholic Students' Union here as well. Again, one of the buildings that I really love here is the Edinburgh University Library building here, which is coming into view. This is an award-winning building. The style is known as 60s brutalism. It was designed and built by Sir Basil Spence in 1960 and won many, many awards. There are 6 floors in the building. Each floor takes up an acre. And when I was there, it was at pre-computer times. It was filled with books, and you had to book in. I mean, you would have to order your books, and you used to go down, because although you can't see it, it goes down for another 3 or 4 floors, and you have to wait about 10 minutes until the librarians would bring your books to you. Lovely building inside, very airy. And nowadays, when we were back doing our exams or doing our studies to be Blue Badge guides, I use the university computers in there quite a lot as well. Now, one of the last buildings I want to show you here is the School of Scottish Studies here. And there's a couple of famous people who've contributed to the Scottish culture. One of them is Hamish Henderson. I don't know if Mike mentioned Hamish Henderson, but he's got a plaque here as well. He went around the country and he was recording accents and dialects, and was also not only in the Scottish dialect, but also the Gaelic as well. So he would go around just making sure he had a catalogue as a history of live culture here. Another one is Sorley MacLean. Sorley MacLean, again, instrumental in establishing the School of Scottish Studies. And you can see it's there in both Gaelic and in English. And this part here is one of Edinburgh's famous parks. This used to be another loch here. It was known as the Borough Loch, so it was a lake. It was drained to make it into a park, an open space. Lovely place to come during the summertime or at weekends. People are out playing volleyball. And I used to spend many times in this library when I was studying for my exams. And people were out here playing softball, volleyball, all enjoying themselves. And I was stuck inside because in the School of Sciences, in the biology school, we were always the last ones for the exams. And all the other students were free and liberated and out enjoying themselves. Whereas me and my cohort were stuck up on the top floor of this building studying. We got a little cafe, open cafes here. Let's go into the park itself. I love the meadows. It's one of my favourite parks here in Edinburgh. At weekends you'll have people playing musical instruments and people coming out to enjoy themselves. It's a real it's a real space because a lot of people in Edinburgh live in apartments, and this is common land, so it's actually owned by the people. Although it's maintained by the city council, it is common land, so it's actually owned by the people. So you can't buy it, you can't sell it, it belongs to us. They have a very similar thing in Glasgow as well. So it was known as common land or common, so people could bring the animals in here to graze, although people don't do that nowadays, but they did. Up until the 1920s, people would bring their animals in here to graze. And I don't know if Mike can pick up, but it's a lovely sunny afternoon.